Okay. Let's get started. Ben, I'm sorry I turned you into a door engineer. It'll work out. Okay. This is quick. I'm one of your chairs, Mark Nottingham. Lars couldn't make it here this week, and he may join us remotely, but I don't see him yet. It is quite early for him, yes. This is the note well. Hopefully you're familiar with it. This is the terms under which we participate in the IETF. Kazuho, you're taking a picture of the note well. Thank you. Good. Especially regarding not only intellectual property, but also especially our behavior as we engage in these discussions. We need to make sure we treat each other with respect. So we have a code of conduct. We have anti-harassment procedures. We also have various structures at the IETF to make sure this is followed and give people help if they need it. So if you have any concerns, please talk to myself, Lars next time perhaps, or other IETF leadership. Blue sheets are circulating. Please sign those as they come by you. They're blue. Brian has so graciously offered to scribe for us. Thank you, Brian. You're a king. And DKG is Jabber scribing. I just checked. The bridge between Jabber and Slack is not functioning terribly well right now, so don't assume that what you say in Slack will be seen in Jabber and vice versa. So let's just use Jabber for now, since that's what everybody's familiar with. I have no idea why you would be not hearing me. Yes. The agenda today, we're going to talk briefly about the hackathon, give people an update of where that got us. And then we're just going to talk about issues. We've gotten to the point where our issues that we have open are relatively few. And so we're just going to churn through the issues list. And we'll continue that on Thursday and end up with some presentations on drafts that we might consider adopting regarding extensions, one on datagrams and one on load balancers. And then talk briefly about planning our future, and we have some as time permits sessions. I see Martin, and is this a scribe interrupt? It always takes precedence. Please interrupt.
Scribes win. I would like to ask for a backup scribe to jump into the Etherpad with me.
Oh, yes, thank you.
Yes.
Would anyone be willing to? Oh,
okay,
Tommy will
cool,
help
thanks.
you, and he's almost right next to you, so that's good.
I think you find
You
they
two
are
should talk
sitting
more.
next to each other.
Martin.
Yeah, so Martin Thompson, a brief agenda bash. I know I talked to you
So a
about
bit
this
close to
before.
the mic.
I know I talked to you about this before privately, but the quick version negotiation stuff,
Mhm.
I think that needs 15 minutes, and I think that needs 15 minutes ahead of the two that you have assigned 15 minutes there.
Okay.
That's one of the key decision points that we're making here. And so if we don't resolve that before we ship version 1, as I hope we do very soon, we're in a bit of an awkward situation. So understanding where we're going with version negotiation, even if we don't have a fixed date for that, is probably the best thing we can do.
No need to go into too much detail. That's fine. We just need to time box all those discussions to make sure that everyone has time available. Martin.
Martin Duke. So is the quick version ossification in the scope of the issue discussion or version negotiation? Issues. Okay, thanks.
Okay, anything else? Any other agenda bashes? Okay. Real quick note, we now have an HTTP3 logo. We may be the first IETF working group with 2 logos, so that's exciting. We have stickers that have been graciously created for us, so I'll be giving those out after the session if you're interested. They're very small stickers. Okay, so let's get right into it then. You can get rid of that. Okay, so for those who don't know, we're using this project on GitHub to track the issues in the late stage process. Right now, that's the transport and TLS issues. We'll talk about HTTP and recovery joining that in a little while. Martin.
Hackathon?
Sorry?
Hackathon? Was that
What?
not the first? Hackathon discussion was not the first thing on
Oh,
the
I'm
agenda?
sorry. Yes. Hackathon. Would you, well, now that you're at the mic, why don't you
Sure.
summarize for us?
Yeah. Can you call up the matrix? If not, it doesn't really matter. So I think we had 7 clients and 11 servers participating. It was worse than usual participation-wise. I think part of it was just attendance in Singapore, and part of it was Draft 24 dropped a couple weeks ago, and I want to say there were maybe 3 or 4 teams that were not ready to go. Other than that, I think Draft 24 interop was fairly successful. The same themes are continuing, and that the basic protocol functionality is in pretty good shape. There are a few implementations that are doing the advanced mobility stuff, and there are a few implementations that are doing the fancy HTTP3 bits like push, but really not as many as I think we'd like to see. I'm sorry. Oh, there were other interop other things going on, which David talked about.
Just really quickly, there are also some implementations doing interop on the datagram extension. So that's also happening. Like our extension mechanism is working, yay. And I'm David Skenazy from Google Chrome.
A quick word, there are a number of implementations since the interim, number of implementations have also now come into the quick interop runner that we've been building. And I think Skenazy said that maybe this week Chromium will also be in there. So we'll see.
Yeah, I think we talked about this before, but if you want a GitHub repo for that in the working group organization, talk to us.
Sorry, but since Jana put words in my mouth, I did not say that, and we have not committed to that yet.
Actually, while we're talking about more general things, one more reminder, we have an interim meeting scheduled in early February in Zurich. So that was announced on the list. If you haven't registered for that and you want to come, please do so soon so we can plan to make sure we have the right facilities available. Any other discussion on Hackathon? Okay. So on to issues. Let's start with the transport and TLS issues. And as you can see, we have a few issues in triage. We'll touch on those in a little while. The editors have 27 issues that they still need to address. I think last time we looked at this, it was about 39 or so they're making some progress. And design issues, we have 12 left here that we've decided are design issues. So let's go ahead and go through those. First up, issue 2792. Yes, we're getting near to 3,000, more than 3,000 issues.
Yeah.
Timing side channels on key updates.
Yeah, this is, we discussed this in Montreal. So as I understand it, they say I can produce a fair representation of the situation, which is that say you receive you're in key phase 0 and you receive a packet in key phase 1. Feel free to interrupt me anytime, Martin, if I'm, sorry, which nominally is key phase 1. Thank you. If it's a valid key phase 1 packet, you're supposed to, you're supposed to basically update your own keys, right? But if it's an invalid key phase packet, they don't have to jump the ball. And so the observation here is, if I understand correctly, that because the key phase bits themselves are not AAD'd prior to packet decryption, that is to say, there's not an independent integrity check for the key phase bit. Then an attacker can flip that bit and thus cause you to do whatever processing you would have done for the new packet, and then you say, oh, well, actually, this is bogus because that is under integrity check, and you drop it, right? And the so far so good, Martin. Right, and so as I understand it, there's some theory that given implementation strategies for doing this, an attacker might be able to probe what key phase you were in. Because if you, so this part where it gets a little complicated, but if you compute the new keys only at the time when you have had a parent key phase change, the attacker might be able to measure the time that you do that in some unspecified fashion. Again, I think this is all relative consensus. I have not seen a really clear definition of how this would work. But the specification then says, in order to prevent this, you want to pre-compute a bunch of keys on a particular schedule so that you won't have this happen. This is the part I'm complaining about. I just there should be a may, and I will shut up.
So Martin Thompson, just to expand on that, I think Eka's summary was good. The draft currently says should do that, and Eka is arguing for a may. I don't care on this particular one. The point here was to make sure that it was understood what the properties of the system were, and that the mitigation was also understood and the costs of that were understood. And I think that a may is perfectly adequate in this case. I've noted that a couple of people just simply generate the new keys in line when they're doing this processing and just accept the fact that that creates a potential timing side channel, and that's fine. And the question is whether we recommend that they don't do that, or whether we just say, if you're concerned about this, then you might want to do this. And that's really the line we're sitting on.
So Eka, your proposal is just to change a should to a may, and we're done?
Does anyone object to that process? I will create a PR when I sit back down. So there's a should recommending pre-generation of the next phase of keys so that you don't leak this signal. And so this will simply make this a may. And I think it's appropriate because a lot of the other aspects of this are very much advisory. So that's consistent with that. There's no interop effect for this. This is a security question. Well, Mike Bishop asks off mic, is there any interop consequences? Therefore, why do we use 2119 language? I think the answer there is generally that we do that for a lot of security related things.
Yeah.
And so it's appropriate to do that. But I think the general feeling is that people are comfortable to varying extents with this side channel and should be making their own decisions.
Okay.
Jenna, I got a quick question, Martin. I haven't seen this text, but is there text around it which talks about the timing attack itself, the timing side channel? So as long as that's there, yeah, I think it's perfectly reasonable to do a may.
Okay. Does this capture the way forward? Okay. Thank you. Next up, and that's already assigned to you three, so that's good. Excuse me. Version ossification, our old friend. 3111. Where are we at with this? It is not assigned to anyone. And we don't have a PR yet.
So my put on the list was that we should defer this. It seemed in Montreal like there might be a sweet spot in the space that we could cut out that we doable. I feel like later discussion has called that assumption into question, and it's now relatively complicated. The thesis, I think so I think there are so I want to make 2 points. The first point is this looked like it was going to be kind of easy, and now it's looking like a lot less easy. That may be requirements creep, but I think it's also like scope, like creep around understanding the problem better. And the second point is that the time that I think we have more time to do this than I think people perhaps thought we did, in the sense that we're going to have like a relatively long period of overlap between the draft versions and the release version. And I know, like I was talking to Ian, who was saying that like they plan to experiment with like, new versions relatively aggressively. So I think that the corresponding risk of like actual ossification seems like comparatively less high. I think like this gives us a little time to work on the problem, and I'm worried it's actually hold up quickly one. And it seems like, if we had, so I guess my put on this, if we solve this problem, in the like 6 to 9 month period while we're doing like test deployments, people could turn their attention to that, and it's perfectly fine as an extension. So like, let us use that mechanism. That was my put. I personally find this problem fascinating. I'm happy to work on it, but I'm trying to like think about the bigger picture.
So your proposal is to not put this in scope for Quick V1.
That's correct.
Okay.
Mike Bishop, Akamai. I will say that part of why we want to pull the version negotiation discussion out of as time permits is that going through discussion of this, it has become clear we don't really want to do this without some idea of how you detect fallback and react to that. And that is work we've already decided to scope out. So I think we either have to adjust our scope to include that work in V1, or we have to push this out of V1. The midpoint just does not work.
So you'd be fine with Ecker's proposal?
I think that's reasonable.
Okay.
Kazuhog, well, for what's worse, there's the pull request that says maybe fixed by thing. I mean, if you look at the top of the page. Yep. But anyways, well, for this approach to work, I mean, the server needs to remember the keys, the alternatives that it has issued. But that means that it doesn't work for multi-CDN use case, which in turn means that it would work only for the large-scale providers. I mean, one of the large-scale providers that on both the client and the server opts into using this mechanism. But it seems that there's not much possibility in that. So as a conclusion, I think we can punt this to version 2 or something.
So you agree, you're okay with Ecker? Okay. It's a long queue for people who agree with Ecker. That's interesting. Okay.
David's Kanazi Google Chrome. So I agree with Ecker as well. And in particular, if this becomes an extension, we're starting to pile up a list of drafts that are coming up. That's a great thing. And since the goal here is to prevent someone from building a middle box that only lets some versions of Quick through and not others, we can establish this by only having a couple large providers deploy it. So I just wanted to say that the odds of Google deploying this on our servers are pretty high. So even if this is an extension, I think it'll get its job done to make sure the version of Quick doesn't get ossified right away.
Ian Sweat, Google. Yeah, I also agree with Ecker, but I also wanted to second the other comment about version negotiation. And I think pulling this in without really having a clear solution to that is just going to be like a disaster. So, and I really don't want to pull in both.
Jana, I got to happen to be part of the long queue that happens to agree with Ecker. I'll say that one thing that I wanted to bring up here, and this might apply to other issues we encounter today as well. There is, I'm hearing some amount of fatigue start to show among implementers and various folk who are starting to wonder when we are actually going to ship. We've heard this before, but I'm starting to see again a sort of a rise in that concern. And it's legitimate, it's completely reasonable. We were hoping to have some things done by the end of this year and we aren't. And so we are sort of passing on the deadline and moving forward. So in the interest of moving forward, I think we should put this aside. Martin Duke, I think, was wanting to popularize the term sidecar. This is a great, he's behind me. Yeah, chuckling. This is exactly the kind of stuff that we can put on the sidecar and sort of have it done soon after we've shipped. And there will be other ones that might be similar as well. But yeah, in general, I agree. And I think we should really be focused on trying to ship.
Martin Seemann, Protocol Labs.
Close to the mic, please.
I just wanted to point out that just deploying different versions of Quick might not be enough to prevent ossification if the middle boxes know how to decode all those versions. So there's the risk that middle boxes will happily let everything through that they understand, but block everything that they don't understand. And for that reason, we need to deploy a version where middle boxes can't decrypt the initial packet. That being said, an extension would also be a perfectly valid solution for this problem. So I'm okay with taking this out of V1.
Martin Duke, I think it's fine as long as John has said, we put it in the sidecar with QuickLB and HTTP priorities and the other stuff that needs to happen very, very soon after V1.
Sure. Okay. So it seems like we have a pretty good group of people who think we can do this as an extension. We'll talk a little bit tomorrow about how we're going to go about doing extensions, and that's another discussion. But I think that's the proposal. Yep. All right. Martin, you had a... It's okay? Okay. He's already moved on.
You can tag that quickly too. Oh, it's all right. I can do that. Don't worry.
And we have another version ossification.
No, that's the same. The same one.
Same. Okay. I think this is closed with no action, or
Quick V2, close, done. Yep. So this is an interesting observation that Eka made doing the review of some of the related work that we're doing. The document currently prohibits the use of key updates until the handshake is confirmed. But in practice, the first key update can occur immediately as soon as you have one RTT keys. I think this is true, but we could still decide to wait for confirmation before allowing key updates. Discuss.
Kazuhoku, I'd like to point out that there's actually an application key that precedes one RTT, which is the 0 RTT key from the client side. So it makes sense to also have confirmation for the first one RTT key being used, because it gives us the time to retire the 0.5 key without the issue of packet reordering causing a deadlock or something. I mean, a performance degradation.
Eric Scorla. So actually, I think Martin is correctly channeling something I said, but that's not what this says. I don't think. Namely, what this says is that the text in the specification is redundant, because you cannot have handshake confirmed that basically assume that point 2 here, once you receive acknowledgement packet sent with your RTTs, implies handshake confirmed, and therefore both tests are not needed in the specification where it says so. So that is not a design change. That's merely a text change. So, and I think now maybe I'm wrong about that, which I'd like to be corrected. But this was not intended to be this is intended only to be a textual change to make life simpler. Now it may be the case that if we take that may be the case that once the handshake done patch comes in, that my statement here is no longer true, in which case I'll revisit that. So I suggest we hold off on this particular issue till after we resolve the key change issue, and then we could just discuss it privately. Because I mean, if I'm right, then this is an editorial issue. And if I'm wrong, then like we can, then it's a non-issue.
There's a bigger discussion to have.
So that said, Martin is separately making a point, which I do agree with, which is we could have laxer rules about when key updates are permitted. The purpose of the key update rules, recall, is to remove the ambiguity introduced by the fact that we only have one bit for indicating key phase, and so you need to arrange the state such that so that when the person receives the inverted key phase, what are they referring to, right? And that's the purpose of the rules. As opposed to that's like why, for instance, like TLS 1.3 allows like an infinite number of key updates in phase, because there's no way to get it wrong, right? And the same thing is actually you can, as soon as you can send one RTT keys, as soon as you have the one RTT keys to send, you could send the next phase, because that either the other side is ready or it's not, but it can't be confused. And so I think if we wanted to relax that rule, we could, but I'm also not like gonna go to the mat for that. But this was only intended to be an editorial point. It was not intended to be a technical point.
Okay, so if it is an editorial point, we'll not belabor that too much. But my opinion, if it is not an editorial point, we should wait until we have disposed of the unchecked done issue and then revisit it.
Sure. Let's do that. Yep. Okay. Next up. That shouldn't be there. Defer it? Okay. This one. So we talked about this pretty extensively in Cupertino.
Really struggling to understand. We're struggling, I'm pretty sure a majority of you guys are struggling.
Sorry.
Uh, 3020. Transport parameter registry is too constraining for innovation. So this was assigned to David. Will you give us an update?
So David Skenazy, Google Chrome. The current spec has our transport, let me start again. Our main joint for extensibility in QUIC is transport parameters. Those are governed by a 16-bit space, and which is covered by an INR registry. And in the current text, almost all of that is specification required. And there are cases for folks who have like private extensions that they don't necessarily want to document, where they want to be able to get a code point without writing an entire spec. So today, that space is so tight that people might end up just either squatting on some space, or which could cause collisions. So the correct fix is to do something to the registry. And Martin has a PR on how we can do that just by changing the rules. It includes both permanent registrations and provisional registrations. And I think that solves the issue nicely. So far, like there's been that discussion kind of landed in part on Martin's PR, but I think we're in good shape there.
Yeah, so Martin Thompson, that PR essentially says that provisional registrations can go anywhere in these spaces, but establishes expert review for the entire space. There's a bunch of advice on how this operates, and there are some rules about how we might reclaim provisional code points if we absolutely need to, and a bunch of other things like that. That's a lot of text. I don't want to really go into too much detail here about what that is, but I want to encourage people to read it and understand it if you care about it.
So Martin,
I expect most people won't.
high order bit, David made a couple of PRs here. One's editorial, one's design. You gave some feedback here. Are you happy with the state of the PRs now, or do you still think we need to discuss it?
So the editorial PR 3108 was merged.
Okay.
And the IANA policy one is superseded by the PR that we were talking about now, which is the 3170.
This one here, right.
And we've had some discussions on that one. There's some finer points that we could continue to discuss here, but I think we're spending much more productive to do that on the list.
Do you think we're close to getting consensus on it?
I talked to David. He seemed relatively happy with what we have. I've talked to a number of people. I think you've commented on it as well.
So I think we can leave it to a little more discussion, and then we'll do the call
I would like to
consensus.
do the call for consensus in the next batch if we
Okay.
could. Yeah.
Great. All right. I don't think we need to spend much more time here.
So just to make sure I understand this, they apply. Provisional registrations are essentially free. Okay. Yeah, we just, for people who don't know, we actually just discovered in like the last call at TLS that the working group had inadvertently assigned the same code point to two drafts. So yes, I would really like to have a registry where we did this, so that we don't. I mean, like this wasn't even it's like uncoordinated by exactly the same clowns, which I mean me.
Right. Yeah, that's never happened before. Okay. All right, that's good to hear. I see people are being free with the labels again. We should have a chat after the meeting, editors. What's happened here? Editors, are you editing the board in real time? Because this changed very suddenly. All right. Oh, I see. Somebody's gone and added some labels when they shouldn't have. Tisk, tisk. So here we are. 3159, server should not accept one RTT traffic before handshake completion. Martin.
So Martin Thompson, this really goes to the core of some of the design philosophy that we've had around the protocol. One of the sort of things we've tried to maintain in the design is if there's something we don't want someone to be able to do, it should not be possible for them to do it. Unfortunately, the way that TLS is structured, the server can send and receive one RTT packets before it really should be. And so in particular, there were a number of implementations out there that were getting the one RTT secrets, installing read keys and accepting those packets and even acknowledging them in some cases, which is inadvisable. The draft explicitly prohibits that. But the question here and the long discussion that went into this was what sort of mechanisms can we put in place to actually prevent that from happening? And the conclusion that I came to, and I think some other people came to, was that if we wanted to change TLS, which is what would be required, and our entire key schedule, that's a really disruptive change. And I would prefer to just strengthen the normative force of this requirement not to read stuff that you shouldn't be reading in this very narrow case. So that's what this pull request proposes.
Yeah, I think that's the right place to come to. So for context, this is not an issue. Well, this is perhaps less of an issue in TLS because of the ordered nature of the data. I'm not saying it's actually. I mean, you can still make this mistake. But I guess I would make two observations. One, there are a number of other things in this area that one can do that we don't stop you. So the example I gave the other day is we don't stop you from processing data frames in handshake packets. Like you can, you better not, but we don't stop you, right? Or in initial packets for that matter. And there's a wire encoding that permits it, therefore, and therefore you have to actually filter, right? So I don't think that this is a principle, but it's one we perhaps respect some of the time and other parts of the time. And it'd be possible, of course, to make it impossible to rejigger the initial encoding and handshake, so you couldn't do that, right? We just don't. This is sort of a kind of a misfeature in TLS, I think, at the end of the day. Something we sort of have a few conversations about fixing. The put here, I see David looking at me, would be to make it so that the client's one RTT keys depend on the full transcript.
Sorry, Ecker, can you make sure you're talking to the mic?
Sorry, the fix would be to make the client's one RTT keys depend on the full transcript. Which I mean, it wouldn't be that difficult, but as I say, it would be a change to TLS and QUIC. So I think probably this is the right answer, given those points. Though it makes me a little sad to pick something like this when you know it's kind of a misfeature in. It's also a misfeature in DTLS, by the way. So I think I will probably float this at the TLS working group during the TLS session and see if people or don't like it for DTLS and would like to reconsider. And we're happy to come back to this group if the TLS working group thinks that that's like a DTLS problem.
So you're okay with merging this now?
I think I'm okay with merging this now. I think if the TLS working group looks at this and they're like, "What? This is a horror show, and we should fix it in DTLS," then we'll come back to you and say "Well, we're going to fix it. You ought to too."
Okay.
Martin Duke. So the substance of MT's PR is fine. I had a different one, which is much shorter for the same problem. But I guess my way of thinking of this is just sort of practical. There are a lot of quick implementations. Some of which are sort of hacky and some of which are done by people that know a lot about security. There's a much smaller number of TLS implementations out there, generally done by people who know something about security. And to work with QUIC, you have to do some special interface API stuff. You can't just pull TLS off the shelf. So I think the right place to apply this, the right pressure point in which to specify this is to specify in the interface between TLS and QUIC when things must pass, so that if the TLS implementation does not push down the receive keys until the handshake is complete, you kind of solve this naturally for quick implementations. That's the narrow part of the waist here of a full stack quick implementation. So that's what I would recommend. And looking at this PR now, I'm not sure if that says that in here, but that's where I think we should actually try to make sure this happens in an enforceable way. I do.
David Skenazy. Yeah, this is sad, but it's something we can live with for now because fixing it, as was said before, is really tricky. So I think we should start that conversation in TLS, but we don't need to go over that here. And then once that happens there, we can make, this would be a really good candidate for Quick V2. In the meantime, I think it would really be nice to either in our interop matrix or in our magical interop harness Docker thingy, have a test for this, that if someone is holding it wrong, we find out. And that way, I think this puts us in a place where we're good enough to ship Quick V1. So I support merging this as the right solution.
You're okay with merging this?
Yes.
Okay.
So Martin Thompson, I just wanted to address Martin Duke's concern. I think his philosophy here is fine, and I would support implementations doing that, but I was very careful not to put that in the specification because I don't believe that levying requirements on the interface between the quick transport and TLS too tightly is appropriate here. I do think that it is absolutely the right thing for TLS implementations considering this to think about, and probably now that in retrospect, now that I built that interface in NSS, I'm thinking that maybe I did it wrong, but I'm not going to unravel all of that just for this particular problem. We have a fix in the quick side of things, and that works fine. I don't want to have any mandate on how people structure their implementations, and that's getting dangerously close to that.
Roberto Payon, quick observation.
Sorry, Roberto, can you speak up a bit?
Yes, Roberto Payon, quick observation. If it's not possible to ensure that a conforming implementation will not have this defect, is it possible to ensure that a remote side can probe to see that the remote side has this defect? That's a yes? Okay.
Kyle Eckritz. I think I agree with what Martin said earlier with
Sorry, which Martin?
That Martin.
Martin Thompson, thank you.
Well, both. That it's the right thing to do to require this, but like we can't really require, or we shouldn't have the spec require that the API based in a certain. We shouldn't be able to like require that the spec requires this particular implementation deal. It'd be ideal to be able to actually require it with the wire protocol, but that will require a change in TLS. I think it's probably worth making that change, but there's a question of whether we go into the effort of that change.
Just in the interest of completeness, the PR that I filed was 3174. That said, I'm not going to die on this hill. And if people like MT's PR, that's great.
Okay, thank you, Martin. It sounds like we'll go ahead and try and get consensus on Martin's PR. Martin Thompson's PR. That's the PR as well. Okay. That leaves us at 2863. Martin Seaman? Or actually, yeah. You have slides? Okay. This is the Discord. Don't step backwards.
Oh. Yeah, this is dangerous.
It is.
Yeah, these are on the materials in the IETF106 folder.
Right.
All right. Yeah. So discarding keys has been an adventure to the point where we formed a design team whose members are listed down here. I'm David Skenazy, and let's hope we killed this. Thanks. So the design team, at some point in the past, I don't even remember which IETF, came up with a solution on how to discard the keys. It went into the spec. And then Martin realized that there was a way it was horribly broken, and then Kazuo found another way in which it was broken. But without going into too much detail, if one specific ACK in the handshake gets lost, the client can end up in a state where it keeps retransmitting its client's finished because it's expected to do that until it gets an ACK, but the server has dropped those keys, so it's never going to ACK that packet. And if you do it just the wrong way, you can exhaust your congestion window and completely shoot yourself in the foot to the point where your connection just never sends anything. Bad, bad, bad. We need to fix this. So, and the other problem that Kazuo noticed is that so discarding keys happens on what we call handshake confirmed, and that also keys off a lot of other features in the protocol, such as connection migration. And if the client migrates before the server has done this, you end up in a state where the server ends up sending long headers to a migrated address, which is something we never really thought of. And then you have other gross things there, bad, bad, must fix. So Ecker did a really nice analysis in LaTeX that is pretty thorough. Next slide, please. But we have a solution, and hopefully our design team never has to meet on this again. So Martin Seaman came up with a PR for this. And so the idea is on the server, the moment you receive the client finished and your TLS stack tells you the handshake is complete, you say, okay, great, the handshake is confirmed. I drop my handshake keys and I send a new handshake done frame from the server to the client, and you keep retransmitting that until you eventually get an ACK. And on the client, as soon as you get that frame, you say, okay, great. Now I know the server has received my client finished. I can discard my handshake keys and I can confirm it and enable some features like migration. And there is one slight subtlety that we added in there is if the client receives an ACK of a 1RTT packet it's sent, because of the rules we were talking about, the server is not allowed to process an ACK 1RTT packets until it's confirmed that it completed the handshake. So that means that also, the server is in that state. It just so happened that maybe your handshake done frame got lost along the way. So you can treat that similarly to the receipt of a handshake done frame, confirm the handshake and discard the keys. Next slide, please. So it works. The important property here that was what we kept shooting ourselves in the foot with was that a lot of the correctness of this depended on subtleties in the recovery draft, and that's not great. So this, because it's an explicit frame, it really kind of is a lot easier to reason about, and it doesn't have a dependency there, and it also doesn't require the application on top of Quick to be sending data for ACKs to flow and all that. So this can only entirely be implemented at the Quick Transfer Quick TLS layer, which is also a lot easier to reason about again. And so it solves the problem of the client sending the client finish because it'll eventually get that frame. And because the server drops it when it sends the frame and the client drops it when it receives it, we're guaranteed to have the server do it before the client, which means that if the client migrates, the server is guaranteed to have dropped his handshake key, so that other problem goes away. Next slide, please. And that's it. We have a solution. Everyone on the design team can live with it. So hopefully we can take this and not have to discuss this ever again because we're all burnt out on it. It's sad.
So we have a proposal. Any discussion? I see thumbs up from the audience and Ecker at the mic.
Yeah, I'm fine with this, or can live with it rather. I just want to flag that if we want to do server-initiated migration at any point in the future, this will not work. So just remember that for the future.
All right, let's keep that in the back of our minds and we can shoot ourselves in the other foot when we get there.
We do have 2 feet. Brian.
This is a point of making sure that that doesn't get lost. Hi, Brian Trammell. Just as a point of making sure that that doesn't get lost, do you want to go ahead and file an issue and tag it Quick V2? I mean, because there's already an issue to talk about, hey, maybe we want to talk about deferred server initiated migration anyway, and we should tag the issue, right? Because otherwise it comes back and like if a smaller group, if the room that considers this later does not include a lot of the people who are in the room right now, then it would be nice to have a record of that somewhere.
That's a much larger issue than just this. This is repair to pay on. I just want to make sure that we all know that we're not just talking about this issue. If we're talking about that, it's much larger.
Jana Iyengar, to Brian's point, Skenazy had a link to Ecker's analysis, which is very good. And I think that's probably Ecker's analysis, which is linked in Skenazy's slides, is a very good analysis. And I think that captures sort of what the scope of different solutions that were discussed were. And I think that's adequate.
Okay. So the PR we're talking about is 3145, right? Okay. So abstaining to discussion, I think we'll do the call for consensus on this. Thank you very much for putting that together, David and team. 3145? Yeah. Mike?
Not on this issue, but I think we skipped over 3197.
1 second. 3187? 97.
Still 97.
Ah.
Yes. 3193. Yes. So.
Not to it yet, I think. Or. Oh, there. Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Yep. Go ahead.
Yeah. So there are two related issues here. 3193 is the other one, and for whatever reason, 93 has not been marked design, but this one has. So. But basically, they are both dealing with things about the active connection ID limit, where when you want to make it work with retire prior to, which we've added since we came to the agreement on how this should work, it now no longer is really good to make the limit be just a suggestion instead of a hard requirement. But if you're going to make it be a hard requirement, the default value does not make any sense because it's not possible not to exceed that limit. I mean, you can't finish the handshake and have issued 0 connection IDs. So.
And you have a PR?
So Eric Kinnear. So Martin Seaman actually wrote up a PR for this. Louder, even louder. Wow. Can we also open up 3193 while we're at it, since it should indeed be designed? The same PR covers both of these issues. At the time, technically, it's possible to not exceed it because it didn't include the one established during the handshake, but the PR proposes changing that. So the previous case was the issuer of connection IDs issues however many they want. There is a transport parameter for the recipient of those to express how many they're willing to store. And if you issue too many, you're expected to drop them. And now the two different sides are out of sync in terms of knowing how many are currently actually possible for the recipient to use. And that's worked, and we had a bunch of language about that, and it manages to confuse everyone all the time. So this PR makes a change now that we have a way for the issuer to require that they be retired and replaced, and for the recipient to bound the amount that they're willing to store and just communicate that as opposed to having to silently drop them. The PR that covers both of these issues makes it so that you now say, I'm willing to store this many. If the person issues you too many, that's actually an error and it's a must not. And so they issue you up to that many. When you retire them, they get replaced. And if they request that they be retired and replace them, then you're all good. So it brings them back into sync. And as a side effect of that, which is kind of what Mike's issue is trying to get at, it means that the default needs to become 2 because it starts counting the one established during the handshake and the preferred address one as counting so that we don't have this magical 2 that are floating off in the middle of nowhere. So it makes everything much more consistent with the way everything else in the protocol works. Should be linked from both of these issues. We just got to scroll.
3201.
That's dangerous. There should just be one PR. This one, yeah.
And it looks like there's still some discussion on this.
I suspect we can click the resolve button on both of these, Jonna. Are we good to click the resolve button on those? Yeah, down at the bottom.
So I had some comments on this earlier, and I've had conversations with Eric and Kazuo since then, and I understand this is a bit of a model shift. The way we were thinking about this earlier was different than the way that these folks are thinking about this now. And now, having understood the model, I think it makes sense. I can see this being natural for those who haven't thought about this in the previous model. So I have some comments in there which need resolving, but those aren't fundamental. Those aren't blocking. Okay. They can easily be resolved. It's just text work. Okay. But I think this PR is sane, and I don't mind doing it this way. I'll also note that apparently this stuff was confusing to implementers. So it's valuable work in that it's not just somebody thinking that this new model is better it's more to somebody's liking than the previous model. It happened to be actual confusion with the old model.
Martin Duke, maybe I'm confused, but why is one an invalid value for if I'm not supporting migration?
At the mic, please.
If you're not supporting migration, then you can never change connection ID because they could never issue you a second connection ID to change to. Now, maybe you don't want to support that. It might be valid.
Yeah, so why is that a problem? Okay.
Eric Kinnear. So you can change connection IDs without migrating. So if you're not supporting migration and you don't ever want to change, those are separate things. The reason that you need to is so that the server can give you the preferred address transport parameter, and that comes with the CID to use. So if they don't give you that, then you are still saying I'm okay with 2.
Okay, but that just applies to the client, yes?
I mean, do you really want it to be asymmetrical?
All right. It sounds like maybe a little more discussion needs to happen.
I'll take this offline with
these people. I think we can probably do a call for consensus the next batch for this one. So people have a look, make sure you're happy. Let's let the discussion play out, and we'll go from there.
I think the key to highlight is that both of the issues are poking at one small point, and the PR as proposed changes the model itself as opposed to one small point. So please read the PR more than the issue.
Sure. Okay. It takes us back down to, I think, 2602. How are we doing? We got 2 more after that. Okay. Does this need any discussion or?
I don't think it needs discussion here. There's a PR and there's some ongoing discussion on there, but I think it's pretty close to getting done.
Okay. So we'll wait for the proposal ready from the editors and then call for consensus. Next up, be more conservative about migration, 2143.
Eric Kinnear. So this is the one that we've had for a while. We wrote up a bunch of text, changed it. Gori went through it and helped us review it since Cupertino. So our last status in Cupertino was that we were hoping Gori would take a look and that we would get some other reviews on the proposed text. We have now done that. Thank you, Gori. And then we went through with Martin and reorganized things a bit. So they should be in good shape to be included in the next consensus call.
Okay. So we'll wait for that and then make the next batch. Martin?
So Martin Thompson, I regard this as largely an editorial exercise, but the the size of the information and the scope of it is such that I think it's important to have this sort of level of visibility. I'm relatively happy where things were going. I haven't seen the new stuff that Ecker has added to this document, which is talking about the handshake and the packet protection and how that interacts with all of this. It's a fairly big project. So I want to make sure that people are aware of what's going on here, because this is really the grounding on which a lot of our analysis is based. It's kind of strange that it's coming so late in the process, but I think that's just a consequence of us now understanding a lot better how we got to where we are. So
Okay.
I've got to review this again. It's going to take a long time. There's a lot of text. It's kind of convoluted, but I think this is headed in the right direction. You'll see a proposal ready very soon.
Yeah, I mean, please do read this. This should have no normative force. But if you read this and you're like, wait, I thought we defended against that, or this is nonsense, or, wait, this vulnerability exists? Holy crap. Then like those are bad things and we should fix them. We should talk about them. So this is like, if this doesn't accurately characterize your expectations, if there's anything here that's surprising to you, then like, that's something you should flag. So people who thought this problem, please read it and try to make sure it matches your expectations of like what you think QUIC was supposed to provide, because that's what it's intended to do.
Christian Whittemore. I have actually studied that vulnerability a lot. I have a unit test testing that in my implementation to see what happens. It's extremely hard to defend against that attack. It's a logical consequence of being able to support NAT rebinding. As long as the IP address are not authenticated, there's very little you can do except from sending probes and doing heuristics. So I think that at best what we should have is a mention of that attack in the security consideration and some kind of do your best recommendation.
Eric Kinnear, two things. First, I did forget to highlight earlier, we've now filled out, and Ecker filled out the first section that was kind of TBD when we discussed this in Cupertino. So thank you, Ecker, for doing that. And to Christian's point, I believe the current text does highlight that attack and lists the capabilities that we believe somebody who has successfully carried out that attack has. That's what I'm hoping people will take a look at and say, no, this makes no sense, we don't like this, or yes, that's about right, that's what an act can do. So it should be in there, and there is also mention elsewhere in the document of that you may want to use some heuristics to try to defend against that, but we don't outline exactly what those are because that would be a whole set of documents by themselves.
Okay. Excuse me. Thank you. So let's go ahead and mark this proposal ready. Go through the process. Everyone take special care to look at this. Make sure you understand the changes that have been made, and we'll see where we get. Thanks for that. Last one on this particular list. Okay. Oh, right. I remember that. Yeah. That's good. It's twofer. All right. So that takes us through our design issues. What we have left is the recovery and the HTTP issues. Excuse me. However, I wanted to go through the triage issues really quickly and highlight maybe one or two. So for those who aren't familiar, we have a process where we triage the issues to make sure we're going to take them on before we actually mark them as design or editorial issues. And there's one that's been a little contentious, which I can't find now. Sorry? Don't know. Thank you. 3189, QUIC. Loads pages really slowly here. Lacks on-path exposure of packet loss, 3189 on the transport draft. And so this is a proposal to add some bits to the short packet header for detecting loss by networks. That's a topic which we've discussed before, and it's related, of course, to the spin bit discussion. And we had a separate issue about that a while back where we came to consensus that we wouldn't do this in QUIC v1. So been talking to a lot of people about this. We actually had a lot of discussion on the issue, so we locked the issue because it doesn't do any good to have a triage process if everyone spends their time discussing the issues before we actually say we're going to discuss them. I'm going to go ahead and unlock that now. Yes, Brian, thank you for your input. I've talked to the area directors about this. I've talked to the proponents about this. My personal take is that it would be most productive for the group if we were to not consider this in the scope of Quick V1, but to consider an extension. And then, we said before that if a proposal emerges, we would consider that, and we would do the same privacy and security review. That would be a process that would be necessary for us to consider this. And the question is, when do we do that process? So that would be that's what's first in mind. But I want to open up the floor. Let's have some discussion. Let's see how people feel about taking this work on. So and Igor is the proponent. So please start.
Igor Lubashev, Akamai. So just to give people a tiny bit of background who haven't been following that closely. So there's a lot of discussion about it in TSVWG. So Quick encrypts its headers. It's one of the new protocols that does it. So it doesn't expose delay and loss to the path, and which many operators and researchers and many other parties said that, well, this is problematic for them to ensure quality of service. Brian had a great proposal about spin bits. There was an extensive privacy discussion, and a working group decided that have a consensus to adopt that and to include one of the reserve bits for spin bit. At that time, there was no viable proposal for the loss bits, so the group decided that there is nothing to do. So there was changed that there are proposals now. There is code that we've implemented based on that proposal, and last IETF, Orange has presented some experiments, data from that code. Yesterday's CNET presented some SETCOM data from experiments based on that stuff. So there are other proposals in that area, which means that it's kind of important. People care. Now, it's clear that it's quite contentious in terms of timing for V1. So I'm ready to commit to make a extension draft for the interim. And if working group is interested in this topic, which I think they should be, because it's there is a lot of interest in the community. So we can work with that. We would need a working group engagement to do a similar privacy consideration for the new draft. And yep, that's all I have.
Roberto Payon. I think I would like to ask everybody the question of what is the layer of this protocol? And I know that since the start, we've smooshed together a bunch of layers to call it Quick. And that was even a design intent in the beginning. However, there is a minimum layer of the OSI model that we have ever asserted that this thing is. And it really feels like we're stepping a layer too deep with these things for reasons that aren't very good. They're merely convenient. And it seems very sad that we will attempt to solve this in Quick when it is a problem that exists for other protocols. And I think if we want to solve this, we should solve this there and not here. And there's all kinds of reasons for it, and I'm sure other people are going to talk about them, but that's how I feel very strongly. Thank you very much.
So just for my benefit, I think our options are to not discuss this in the scope of Quick V1 and say this is out of scope, or we could say yes, it is in scope, or we could instruct Igor and the other proponents to come up with an extension draft, and we'll start the extension discussion. If people think there are other options or they have opinions about those options, I'd like to hear them.
So hi, Brian Trammell. It sounded to me like Roberto was proposing that we do an IPv7 BOF. I mean, you're talking about pushing it one layer down, right? So back down to the network layer. Right. Yeah. So it's it sounds like it's maybe even like a path layer, maybe on top of UDP. might be a substrate. I don't know. I told you I was going to take over your working group, Mark. I'm sorry. Now, more seriously, I think there's, I don't really want to just read what I put into the issue. I think there's like two questions here. Actually, I do put it up there so I can remember what I wanted to say. There's two questions here. One is, do we want to, recognizing that it is kind of an expedient hack, do we want to basically say, look, we want to replace the fact that people have used implicit pass signals in TCP to do loss measurement with explicit pass signals for loss measurement in QUIC? And then the second question is, do we want this proposal to be the basis of that? And I think we should separate those out. I think it's really late to have this conversation. I think, absolutely we should say, let's try and figure out, I like Igor's proposal. It's like, we're going to go really fast and see if maybe we can get something that might actually work in the time frame. So the bet there that Igor is making is that, with the rest of the things that we need to get done for V1, we're going to be slower than we think we are. And I think looking at our history, that's a pretty good bet. Huh?
No,
Mike,
you need
sorry, I
to
can't
get the
do
mic,
that down there.
Christian, sorry. Please don't disrupt it.
Schedule chicken. Yeah, pretty much. The thing I'm concerned with a little bit is that we talk about it as an extension, and this would be different than any of the other extensions that we're talking about. Like all the other extensions we're talking about are stick it in a transport parameter, and it's inside the crypto, and there's no change to the wire image, and it's just right. Like those extensions are easy, right? Like it might actually turn out that those extensions mean we never actually really have a QUIC V2. We just have profiles of QUIC under V1 because we're actually really successful with transport. I down. Yeah. Well, Roberto started with IPv7, so let's just blow it all up. The discussion that we could have that would make a extension-oriented solution to this question easier is how many bits do we want to lay aside? And how many bits do we think that we can lay aside in V1 for a V1.5 or V2 solution for this? Because it would be sad if we decided that we actually do want this. We actually have found a way to, I think that, this actually meets the requirements of exposing the loss information. There's a big question about privacy and security, which we'd have to dig into pretty deeply. I think it's less clear than the story was for the spin bit, and the story for the spin bit was 2 papers worth of not very clear. It would be a shame if we decide we want to do this, we figure out a way to do it, and then the bits are gone. So I think that is a discussion that we probably should have, and then we can defer the rest of the discussion with respect to how exactly we do this. Because I think there are probably ways that look a lot like this, but are subtly different, that have different characteristics. I have kind of the beginning of an idea that I haven't actually had the time to work on, and I don't really want to say, hey, you should do my thing, even though I haven't written it down, because that's stupid. But I think that we can discuss like other techniques here separately from the whether we want to do this or not, and that's separate from the how do we make sure that we have the space to do it when we're finally done.
So we have a pretty long queue, so let's keep them brief.
This is DKG. I'm jabberscribing. I'm channeling Chris Lemons. He says, I think the question for excluding this from QUIC V1 is this. Will the lack of a packet loss detection mechanism in QUIC prevent operators from implementing it? Perhaps some of those companies who have expressed strong interest in this can comment on how blocking this is or isn't.
Ian Sweat, Google. I definitely think we do not need to put this in QUIC V1. We've already I thought decided this once, but I would like to say that if there's some small change we need to make to QUIC V1 to make it easier to actually run experiments and get data about this mechanism as well as potentially other competing mechanisms, because I'm also not 100% convinced this is the best mechanism, then I am amenable to that, and I don't think that should be considered necessarily out of scope. So I do agree with Brian on that point, that I don't want us to get into a situation where we could never ever do this after we do QUIC V1, but we could also do QUIC V2. That would be much better.
David Skenazy, Google, to echo some of the points already made.
David, you need to speak up.
Oh, sorry. Wow. The decision we reached as a working group a while back took a very long time and a lot of energy. I'm saying that the decision was to add the spin bit as one bit that is optional to implement in the spec. This is a interesting research project. I've read the proposal. It's interesting, but research takes time. And I didn't see anything in there that warranted revisiting the working group's consensus decision. And also, like, from my engineering understanding, I think this can fully be implemented as an extension, negotiate with a transport parameter, and then use those bits. So I'm really strongly in favor of declaring this out of scope for Quick V1 and in scope of an extension. And let's see that extension draft and we can discuss it there. We already have a bunch of extensions. It might even ship at the same time as Quick V1. But if it gets delayed because of, let's say, the privacy review, it won't delay Quick V1. So let's just keep it on the side and see what comes out from it. Let's not delay Quick V1.
So just to be clear, you would be interested in looking at this as an extension?
Yes, I would read the extension draft.
Would you put any effort into the security and privacy review if it came about?
I can't commit to that because that kind of review takes a lot of time.
But would you be open to it?
I'd be open to it.
Okay.
Right now, I want to focus on shipping Quick V1, but I'd be open to it.
Thank you. That's good information. Thanks.
To echo a few of the things people have been saying before, certainly this should be shippable as an extension. If it's not, then we failed in our extension mechanism, and that'd be nice to know. So I think this also ties in with something Ian was saying, like if we find out there's some reason we can't ship this, that was something that a high priority to address. If you can't ship this as an extension, that was something a high priority to address now. I am also not in favor of putting this in Quick V1. I feel like we spent a lot of time litigating this previously, and this would reopen that. We're going to have, it's true, we'll have some time in this sort of like, somewhat like idle period when, we're doing deployments to think about things, but I think we have uses for that time. And I mean, the exact same resources which we need to like do other extensions, I think are more important, would be consumed during the security and privacy review. So I think the idea we're going to play, as Christian put it, schedule chicken, and like, if this is somehow finished, then maybe it just gets crammed into the last minute. I think is like super unfortunate. We shouldn't do that. If I understood that correctly. As with David, I at some point would be willing to like take a look at the security and privacy of this, but I think it's not. I don't think it's a super high priority for me.
Okay, thank you.
Chris Box, BT. As someone who designs and runs a mobile network.
Sorry, can you speak up just a bit?
Sorry, Chris Box, BT. So my day job is designing and running a mobile network. So as part of that, I just want to reiterate the need to actually understand packet loss and where it occurs in the network, because without that, the network will inevitably deteriorate. So whether how it's done and whether it's done now or later, I don't mind how it's done, but we don't want to wait too long, because you're then incurring those issues that it will generate, particularly if it's adopted a lot. So, and to address the other point, no, we don't block QUIC. We have no intention of blocking QUIC. It's got a lot of good properties, but please make it manageable and operatable.
Okay.
So, Gori Fairhurst, I think this sort of use of the bytes that we call transport is within the transport area. Okay. I think this use of bytes, which we put in the header, is part of something we do in transport area. IP performance metrics is part of this group. So have other groups looked at transport issues to do with manageability and loss detection, latency detection, etc. So I think we need to stop going on that this is not part of the layer, whatever the layer is. It's part of the transport area, from my opinion, and I think we should do this. Whether this proposal is right now, I can't judge, because I guess we spent so much time in the working group not talking about this. We haven't actually looked at these things in enough detail. So this could have a bad implication. It makes QUIC an experimental protocol based on deployment and whether it's manageable. which was never really part of what I was hoping for in Quick. So if we accept this and we look forward, then Quick v2 will do something good and we can design it. I don't know how to solve this, but I just think we need to stop talking about it being at the wrong layer.
Right. So this is also about layering, and because I've heard initially the opinion that we should do nothing here because it's architecturally not pretty, and it may be actually architecturally not pretty, but the whole reason why Google went with layering Quick on top of UDP and not on top of IP is because of pragmatic realization that that's the only thing that actually works on the current internet as we have it. So it is in the kind of spirit of Quick is that we have to be pragmatic and understand what works and actually do it that way. Now, meanwhile, there are discussions in TSVWG how to do it the right way, but one should not stop the other.
Ted Hardy speaking. Clearly, we must absolutely do this, or people might deploy ECN, and since we have to prevent that. Wait. My actual point here is we have had a long discussion of this. We are very, very late. I am happy to work on this if it is not gating for V1. But I strongly believe that we should not set aside any bits for it now because those will get squatted on very quickly by people who have other experiments they wish to run with the network, some of them deleterious to the network. We should have a real design process, and if you need somebody else to be stucky to corral that, I will once again volunteer. But please, no gating where we are moving for now.
Yeah, Martin Thompson, I'm just going to add to the chorus of those saying that this is going to take longer than I'm willing to tolerate. I'm looking at being done with the core transport protocol very soon now, as in this month, from the perspective of the issues. You saw we discussed the issues here, and we got to the end of the list in a very short amount of time. And that's indicative to me of something that's basically ready to go. We're going to hold this back a little bit because we want to get some deployment experience, but other than that, we're done. And the spin bit discussion took an extraordinarily long amount of time. I just wanted to point out also people have been talking about extension. I think they're also thinking about minting new versions. I don't want to go to the point of reserving bits in V1 for speculative reasons. We have bits lying around because, well, they come in multiples of 8. And that's really all. So I don't want to start speculating about what we might need bits for later. If we need bits for something later, we have in the order of 9,600 of them in any given packet. We should probably use them, and we've done what we can to protect our ability to use those packets through the invariance and the encryption and all the other things that we're doing here. So I'm not super concerned about that sort of thing. I think the ship has sailed on whether something like spin or lost signals can be invariant in the protocol. Take that as you will. If you're interested in receiving those signals, that's a bit unfortunate. If you're not, then you might think that's a feature, but that's where we're at. So I think that the plan as proposed is fine. I too can participate in analyzing these sorts of things. Again, that will depend on, at the time that decision is made, where this fits in with all my other priorities, and I'm sure that everyone else is in that same position.
So let's go ahead and cut the queue and drain it, and I'd ask the folks remaining to withhold from the instinct to pontificate a little too much.
This is Daniel Kahn Gilmore from the ACLU. Please do not make this something that is required for Quick V1. If it's proposed as an extension, again, similar to the other commenters, like I would be willing to look at it a little bit. I think if I can make the time for it. I am not confident that this is a good idea. I'm not confident it's a good idea in terms of ossification, among other things. So But whatever happens, please not part of Quick V1.
Kazuhoku, I agree with others that we can consider this in V2 as an extension. And I'm also not opposed to leaving some bits in V1 unused that we might use for experiments. Though, I'd also argue that those bits cannot be a brown bag that an endpoint can run an experiment, because there should be a bilateral agreement between the client and server to run experiments with the understanding of what the risks are. And that means that the bits cannot be a brown bag. So if we are going to run an experiment, there should be a bilateral agreement on what the exact exposure is.
Christian Wittmer, I agree with the other speakers that this should not be part of V1. I mean, the measurement argument, I understand, but the measurement argument in a network will only take force when the vast majority of the traffic is quick, and we are not there yet. So it's clearly not a V1 issue. On the other hand, I am very happy to work on that as an extension, to help people implement the extension, and to study the privacy issue that are linked at that. Let's remember that the study of the privacy issue for the spin bit took us several months, and we don't have several months between now and when we want to ship V1. So let's do it properly, not rush it, and I'll be happy to work on it later.
Jana Iyengar, I'll very quickly just agree that, yeah, this shouldn't be
Jana,
part
you
of
need to
V1.
speak up.
Sorry. I'll very quickly agree that this shouldn't be part of V1. Separately, we are designing not just for mechanisms that we want, but we also want to keep in mind that we are designing for reality. What I mean by that is that we've designed the spin bit. And if you were to think of that as a template, the spin bit is something that is optional. The endpoints may or may not spin it. We have absolutely no experience at this point to see whether that's actually going to get deployed in the wild or not. Designing more bits that are not going to get deployed potentially makes no sense to me. So I'd like to wait and see if we actually get some traction on the spin bit before we talk about adding more bits that are optional and may not get spinned.
Tommy Pauly, Apple. So, I mean, echoing a lot of people's comments, I don't think this is appropriate to have as a requirement for V1, but I think it is very useful to look into. And to echo Christian's point, I think it will be actually a much better mechanism if we wait. Because once we get more information, we will be able to do far better experimentation around different extensions. Right now, the traffic we see, we have a lot of browser traffic, essentially, in one type of pattern. We are going to start seeing a lot more use cases, different types of traffic, and the fact that we are now essentially moving things that used to be implicit, and now we're putting them across an encryption boundary and having, explicit bits. This is something we haven't done very often before, and we need to figure out how it works. And even if we get experience just today with how it works for browser traffic, that may not be the right solution long term. So I think it's better to do quick experimentations as we can with V1 as extensions.
Go ahead, Igor.
So I completely agree that it's an experimental thing, and which means that we need to run the experiment to see how it works. So we need to be able to run an experiment to see how it works.
Okay. So, this is one of the mechanisms that, for it to work and for it to give the operators what they want, they need the cooperation of the endpoints. And from what I'm hearing from the implementers is that they don't want this to be on the critical path for Quick V1, but they're very open to it as an extension. And importantly, I heard a number of people say that they were willing to consider helping out with that security and privacy evaluation, which for me is critical. That needs to be a reasonable attempt to evaluate the properties of the proposal. Brian?
Hi, Mark. I'd like to actually ask, so a few people who were in line said, yeah, I would be willing to work on this, but not in V1. I don't think anyone said I'd be willing to work on this faster than V1 other than the proponents. Could we do just a quick show of hands in the room who would be willing to work on sort of the security, privacy design of this, Yeah, there's some noise back there. Who would be willing to work on the security privacy design of this after things ship, right? Like, so it's kind of like the who's interested in the design team thing
Sure.
that we've asked before. Can
We're-
we ask
we're
that
getting
question?
there. Yeah, we're getting there.
Did I just ask that question? Okay, cool. Yeah.
You're trying to chair the working group again. Right. It's a good selection of people. I think it's at least as healthy as what we had for the spin bit, and that's making me pretty happy.
I wanted to see whether that was, so yeah, thanks.
Right. My concern before this was that if no one was willing even to put that work in, we would be in a bit of a pickle. Yeah. And so we have a group of people who are willing to work on it as long as it's not on the critical path for V1. And so I think that's the path that is most likely to give us a successful outcome for some definition of success. And so what I'd recommend to you, Igor, is take you and your co-author's draft, convert it into something that looks more like an extension. And we'll talk about this a bit more tomorrow, but we're talking about how we can take on extension work in this working group. And that can be something that, just like tomorrow we're having load balancer and the unreliable delivery propose extensions, you can propose an extension. The only question in my mind for that is time frame, whether it's better to do that in the Zurich interim, which we've announced, or whether it's better to wait till we have a broader audience for it in the Vancouver meeting. But we can take that discussion offline and find the right time for you. So I think that's from listening to the mic line and what's happened in the room, I think that's the plan forward. I think we'll close this issue as not in scope for Quick V1, but anticipate an extension draft that we can discuss in the future. Is everyone happy with that? I'm seeing nodding heads.
As the transport and
you need to speak up.
Oh yeah, I need more water. As the transport and working group chair, or whatever. I can't talk even. Right. We'll work with you also to try and make sure there's a home for this. Because if there is energy here to develop this, then it should be here. If there are central mechanisms that are generic across things, then maybe they can be in this working in TSVWG. But we should do this in one place. Your place should be a great place if you've got an extension.
Okay, great. Definitely make sure we can coordinate that. Any comment from Miria from an AD perspective? You're happy. Okay, thank you. All right, let's move on. I don't think there are any other triage issues we need to discuss right now, unless the editors want to point any out.
Do you? I submitted the slides for the other issue that we skipped over. If you want to accept that PR and pull it up.
Which other issue?
The ALPN one.
That's an HTTP issue, right?
Mm.
Yeah, I noticed that it flipped parity a little while back.
So we've concluded that the text that would need to change is an HTTP, but it's a principle that we probably want to apply to all protocols using QUIC. So we can discuss it either way.
Well, so next is recovery and HTTP issues. So we can start with that one if you like.
Works for me.
Okay, we've got a half an hour. So is that good? Okay. You submitted that to the working group materials repo?
Yeah.
Okay. Which one?
Apparently we both submitted it.
I'm going to take Mike since he's an editor for the document, I guess. I'm really hoping they're the same.
They're the same slides. So.
Okay. Why don't you come on up front, Mike? You lost Etherpad? We lost the internet.
Yeah, mine has not been terribly well connected. I just switched to tethering on my phone. No, thank you. Use your phone.
Mike, why don't you pull it up a bit closer to you? Or just take it out of the holder if you like.
All right. So, Stepping forward. Basically, the question is, when you put an ALPN identifier in the TLS handshake, are we talking about the application layer, ALPN, or are we talking about the entire stack, which is H3 all the way down through the transport that it uses? Now, right now, that's kind of a given because we only have Quick V1. But in fact, we're actually, when we're doing interops, we have an ALPN token that says what H3 version we're using, and we also have a version in the Quick packet that says what transport version we're using, and we have draft versions. We haven't been doing them out of sync, but technically we could, as the current state of things. So, looking forward. So, we kind of have to look at what the world is going to look like. We expect that we're going to ship new versions of both protocols. We expect that at least some Quick versions will keep a consistent interface to the application, or at least will be superset to the current interface, and therefore that H3 would work over those Quick versions. But those application interfaces are not invariants, so there will also be some Quick versions that don't work with H3. And we need to figure out how we express that and what we do with that. So, next. So what do we do when there's a Quick 2 that H3 works over? One option is we mint a new ALPN token, H3Q2, and we say the tokens refer to the entire stack. Another one is to say that the client will offer H3 over Quick 2, and if you speak Quick 2, hopefully you know that that application protocol can be spoken over that transport. Now, hypothetically, you could get into a state where the server says, well, we negotiated Quick 2, but I don't believe HTTP3 is a valid protocol over that version. Now, how do you do that without triggering a version fallback on transport? That gets a little messy. But the idea is we don't have a way to identify what that application interface is. Next. The way we had originally spec'd version negotiation was that you agreed on the version at the transport layer first, and only then were you able to get into what was even in the ALPN token, because you couldn't find it until you knew what the transport version was. Now we have this draft for version negotiation where potentially you could be doing the negotiations at the same time, and you could choose the transport version and application version combination that you like and know the trade-off. But we still have to have a fallback path to the other type of version negotiation if they're not compatible. But here we're talking about, we really have two concepts of compatible versions because this is compatible with the app layer. So next. So these two approaches, if we stick them in alt service, we might bring back the Quick version hint that says, I speak H3 and I can speak it over these Quick versions. Or maybe we have to make multiple advertisements of H3, which implies Quick 1. We also have to advertise H3Q2. We also have to advertise H4, which might imply a particular Quick version. And that list could get kind of long. So we have to figure out, do we want complicated and flexible, or do we want simple but everything is rigid? Next. So HTTP3 can't define how it works with Quick 2 because Quick 2 doesn't exist yet. It can define itself in terms of abstractions. We already have a lot of that in the interface between the two documents now. We've parceled out required operations for connections and streams. If we maintain those operations as being possible in a future version of Quick, then H3 should work. But we don't have a name for that interface. This is not object-oriented programming where we can say requires interface streamable. So we don't really have a dependency on TLS itself as the crypto handshake, maybe, although we have a lot of cases where we assume that we're using TLS or something that provides us with an authority. So what are actually the critical services, and do we want to define that? Next. So one option is to say, we're not going to solve this now. That seems to be a popular answer in the working group these days. We could say that HTTP 3 requires Quick version 1, and if Quick v2 keeps the same shape of the application interface, then Quick v2 can extend the definition of the H3 ALPN token, or we can have a separate draft that does that, or one that mints a new ALPN token. We can solve that later. But H3 is not the only protocol that's ever going to ride over Quick, and I don't think this working group wants to be responsible for curating which app layer protocols will work with Quick and which versions of Quick. I don't know if that's work we want to take on. Next, and I believe that's last. Sure.
So Martin Toms, just to clarify, this is to avoid that situation where you have Quick v2 and one side thinks that HTTP 3 is fine to run on Quick v2, but the other is not aware of the fact that this is the case, and you end up with some form of negotiation failure. So we need it to be the case that when you implement this new combination of things, you can be sure that the signaling that you provide to the other side will be understood. And
Yes.
so we don't want to get into a situation where a client or a server decides to pick HTTP 3 on Quick version 2, but the client thinks that's a terrible idea or isn't aware of the fact that this is possible.
Right. So if Quick v2 actually defines H3's compatibility with it, you can't compliantly implement Quick v2 without knowing that H3 is supported. Ecker?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that I'm just not seeing why that's like such a big problem. Like write it down in the document.
In the Quick document?
Yeah.
Okay. So what do we do for protocols that are not HTTP?
I mean, like we've been doing this for like how long with TLS, and they've never had this problem. So I'm just like not persuaded. This just seems like a lot of like very abstract theorizing about some problem which I don't believe exists. I mean, yes, in principle, we could leave aside that that to break things entirely, but I just that you could make that decision, and yet in a situation where both sides were so confused, I just find very implausible. I mean, it's not like you're not trying to do private set intersection of like everything each side supports. When the client starts, it knows it wants to do HTTP. So if like there's some Quick v9 that doesn't do HTTP, the client's not going to offer it, and the server's not going to accept it.
Can we finish the presentation?
Sorry?
Are there more slides? I thought the presentation was finished.
There are more slides, and we have a queue, and we started with a clarification question, then all of a sudden we had a huge queue explained.
We started discussing.
Let's let Mike finish, maybe?
Yeah, let's finish. So one more. There is, if you do negotiate the transport first and then the app layer, which is kind of what TCP does. You have TCP, and only then do you see the TLS handshake to negotiate the app layer. In this kind of weird hypothetical situation where there's an H4 that it doesn't support Quick 2, if you've already negotiated that you're on Quick 2, you just won't include that in your ALPN offer, and the server won't know that it could have done H4 if it had only chosen Quick v1. It's a little weird. Hopefully, we continue to support things as we get bigger, but it means that the server is not operating with full knowledge of what the possibilities are. Next. So really, this is just a choice we need to make. If we have the token do the full stack, that is a little bit inflexible, but it is simple. And if we have the token identify just the app layer, which I think is more appealing from an architectural standpoint, then things get potentially hairy in terms of who knows what is supported with what Quick versions.
And Ben Schwartz, do we have to make this trade-off now, or can we delay it until such time as there has been created a version of Quick that is not backwards compatible, or we are about to create such a version of Quick?
So what the document says right now, the TLS document says that the application protocol can restrict which transport versions are acceptable. And I think that is probably the right choice we have there. Right now, HTTP3 says that it can be used with any version of QUIC where the crypto handshake is TLS, which, given that that says nothing about what the interface is, I think there has to be a change in H3. The change could be we require QUIC v1 until otherwise stated.
Yeah. So Martin Thompson, this philosophical difference has existed since we published RFC 7301, because everyone has assumed a very different model of how ALPN operates. Now we have an identifier now that identifies something that maybe Ted thinks means this and DKG thinks means something else. And we've been happy up until this point. Well, actually, we've not been happy up until this point. This has been a continual problem, but we keep sort of dancing around this problem in the wider community and in TLS, in HTTP, in other working groups that now rely on ALPN. We've been dancing around this issue, and I don't think we absolutely have to 100% decide on this now. We can punt this down the road. We can tweak the language in the HTTP spec and move on blithely, ignorant of the fact that we've got this problem that we'll have to solve later on. We can accept that problem and defer it. But I kind of would like to know what ALPN means, what it really identifies, because it's pretty clear to me that we don't have consensus in this community about what that is, which is unfortunate, because I think a number of people have been headed off down different paths on various assumptions, and we all know what assumptions are good for.
Tommy Polly, Apple. So I think we should absolutely update the H3 text to redefine what it requires. I would urge that we don't, we shouldn't say, oh, this requires TLS as the one thing. And I don't think we should also say that it requires QUIC v1. It'd be great if we can have some language that describes the transport services offered by a QUIC v1. I mean, essentially saying you need this shape, right? Because if you're running H2, you require essentially a TLS stream interface, a secure stream interface. And the things that we're talking about that would potentially break H3 would be, oh, you no longer have reliable streams, or like something fundamental in that transport interface. So this is a great conversation. We want to talk about how it evolves into the future. That's a thing for taps and stuff like that. But I think we shouldn't necessarily make the decision about what the ALPN encoding is going to evolve into in the future until we get to that. But I think really H3 needs to be tied to whatever mapping of the transport we have on QUIC v1 today, and that could work for QUIC v2, but if QUIC v2 decides to ditch streams, then we'll have to rethink.
So there are sections in the QUIC transport document that define particular operations that have to be supported. One possibility would be to point into the QUIC v1 document and say, all of these operations must be supported by the version of QUIC that you use.
That's great. So I'm going to cut the mic lines here. I'd also like to take this opportunity to point out we are now a transport working group talking about a security working group's concept of what an application is. So we probably need to coordinate a little bit. Please go on.
Kyle Neckritz. When we're doing the negotiation for the transport version, that's something that's generally going to require round trips or a round trip if you don't get your first choice. Whereas the ALPN negotiation essentially piggybacks off the round trip that's required for TLS anyway. And if we try to shove them together, then we lose the possibility of doing some ALPN negotiation that doesn't add additional round trips. And that's a feature I'd really like to keep.
David Skenazy, Google. So first, to respond to Ecker's point about how this has never been a problem in TLS, the conceptual interface, or SLA, from TLS to its application is dirt simple. it's a byte stream. That's all there is to it, pretty much. And so when you can totally have, TLS 10, 11, 12, 13 versus HTTP 11 or 2, that interface between them is the same. So these are completely independent problems. In QUIC, we've taken the layering model and removed the layers of indirection to get better performance. So that causes these problems. That's why I think it is useful to have this conversation. However, I think, as some people have pointed out, predicting the future is hard. And all we can do today is think about what we have today. So to Tommy's point, the idea of going full taps, as I like to call it, and defining all of the properties of these things is hard. The TAPS working group has been working on it for the years. And I really want to avoid being in a state where one person thinks it means X and one person thinks it means Y, and then people, like Brian was saying, disagree on whether HTTP4 fits on QUIC v2 or not. So how about we keep this dirt simple and contained to what we know about today? So I really like the proposal of HTTP3 means QUIC v1, period. If tomorrow someone has QUIC v2, then they can write a one-page RFC that is, this works, HTTP3 works with QUIC v2. The only downside here is that we would have to spend a few more bits in the LPN and call it H3Q2. So I think that's the best way. And one thing I'll add as well is ALPN is a concept that's specific to TLS. QUIC, the invariants don't necessarily have TLS. If someone wants to build HTTP over QUIC with a custom handshake, a custom key exchange mechanism, which we're probably looking into at Google for some corporate stuff that has some magic crypto stuff in a corner somewhere. We'll have to define that internally, and it might not even use ALPN at all. So anyway, let's just keep this simple. Have the string H3 mean HTTP3 QUIC v1, and then we can solve that problem when we get there later, mainly in the interest of shipping this sooner.
Hi, Brian Trammell. I came up here to disagree with David, but then he made sense, so I'm going to agree with him. I think that this actually should be deferrable because the actual question that you're asking here is much harder than you think it is. You've taken the idea of, well, the big question is much harder than you think it is. You already think it's pretty hard. It's harder than that. The easy question is, can we just bind, can we, so the problem is that we've taken the concept of ALPN, which was essentially a security layer trying to abstract away what an application layer is. And just like, that's just an application. I don't really care about it. And the transport doesn't matter because it's always going to be TCP forever. The word layer there is wrong. What the transport layer actually wants to talk about, or the security service, I'm like getting completely screwed up on this. See what happens when you put too many layers in a stack. What it actually wants to talk about is the whole stack, right? So it should actually be called ASPN, not ALPN. It's the application stack protocol negotiation, application protocol stack. Anyway, so the bigger question of how do we do this? We need to think more about what we mean about a stack. The fact that QUIC has a much more complicated interface to its transport, that HTTP3 has a much more complicated interface to its transport than anything over TCP ever would, means that you might think that you can do things in that top thing. It's like, hey, these are going to layer cleanly, but you'll always be wrong, right? There will always be some subtlety that means that there's some dependency here that will trip that up, and then you have to have an exception. I think that the longer, more complicated discussion is probably going to land on the bottom one, identify the stack and come up with a way to do that that's not going full taps unless you mean to. Come to taps, it's this afternoon. But for now, I think we just basically say H3 is Q1, Q2 gets to decide what the binding is. And then we get ourselves the time to have that more complicated discussion down there better. We don't make a bad decision under time pressure because that would be a bad idea.
Yeah, TLDR, I mean, we've had a bunch of points where we we punted out like the exact way we were going to spell new versions, even though we knew that probably was going to happen. case in point, the key label expansions where we're calling it quick as opposed to quick one. I think it's perfectly fine to spell this H3 and say it means quick V1. And then we can, when we define quick V2, we can decide we need a new ALPN token or not at that point. With that said, a few minor points. We really can't define the semantics of ALPN here any differently than the way it already is defined, because that's a TLS question. So you'll need some sort of liaison statement. Those people are totally different from the people in this room. Second, the problem of having sequential negotiations give you suboptimal outcomes is not at all restricted to this version thing. We have that in 1.3, for instance, when if you have odd, if you have odd interacting things, it was worse in 1.2. And there's always a tension between trying to get the optimal outcomes versus having this giant list of some of your orthogonal things. So I'm not too sweated about that. The third thing is response to David. Funny you should mention that TLS has a straightforward application interface, because there's a thing called DTLS, which also has ALPN. And so I guess my thesis is nobody ever thought, I don't think, that you could run HTTP2 over DTLS, and that would be cool. But we don't actually say you can't do that.
Jana Iyengar, I'm actually surprised. I have a contrary opinion here, so I'm going to state it. The way I understand it, and we don't need to parse this here because obviously it's not the place to necessarily do it, but ALPN for TLS is the thing that sits on top of it. My understanding is application is convenient because that's what sat on top of TLS. In this case, the thing that sits on top of TLS, if you look at it in a certain way, is QUIC and HTTP. And so again, to me, the simple solution of identifying the combination of QUIC and HTTP makes sense. I don't see that as inflexible when I understand that it's rigid because you're specifying the whole thing that's sitting on top there. But it is also the one option that to me leaves more choices in the future. One thing to keep in mind is that yes, the future is unpredictable, but we are putting a lot into QUIC V2, or we're hoping that we'll come up with a new version of QUIC very soon. But I don't think anybody in the room is hoping that we'll come up with a new version of HTTP very soon. And we may or may not want to couple those things in an indirect way, where we say that HTTP3 implies QUIC V1, then we have to figure out how to wedge out of that. So it just seems to me that the simple and easy solution right now is to combine the two and to say that the LPN is H3Q1, and we can easily say H3Q2. The problem of scaling, that's the problem that shows up, is that you may have a lot of them. That I'm happy to punt, because we can deal with that later when we actually have the problem.
Okay. So it sounds like we have some agreement there. Do you have, would you like a hum, or do you have enough information?
I heard a lot of support for H3 equals Q1. It sounded like some support for H3 equals a version of QUIC with the properties in Q1. Might be useful to have a hum to see whether those are equal or one vastly outweighs the other.
Sure. Yeah. Martin. Yeah.
I was just going to say the same thing. I would like to know how much lies on the just say H3 uses Q1 versus the properties thing.
Right. And so I think, yes, gentlemen.
Clarification question, Kazuhoku. So what does it mean? What does feature change actually mean? For example, consider the case where QUIC V2 has one less stream ID number space. Does that mean that it has a different feature than QUIC V1?
So speaking as the H3 editor, no, because we've been careful to design away from that. We don't assume a particular shape to the set of stream IDs.
I think the choices at hand are we either define H3 as using exactly Q1, QUIC 1, or we define some abstraction that, we do the work.
Which I think already exists in the transport doc.
I don't know that there's agreement on that.
Okay. We may have to may have to see whether there are additional things that get added to that.
So I think the first is very simple. H3 is Q1, we're done. The second is we're going to do some work to try and make it a little more nuanced. And that work is a little bit unknown at this point.
Sure.
Mark, am I wrong that the third option is that we actually explicitly list out, it was one of the options there, H3Q1 as the ALPN?
Yeah.
No, it's not. Not bike sharing. We're talking about the options on the table.
No, you're changing the opaque token that means the stack.
I'm saying be explicit about the stack.
I haven't heard any support for that yet. If somebody else would like to support that,
well,
please come to the mic.
I do.
Oh, noted. Yeah.
Tommy Polly Apple. So as one of the people who brought up talking about the mapping, I also want to say I don't really want to open that whole can of worms here, and I don't really know if we have the right information to decide this. To some degree, I'd almost just want to see like a minimal PR, because I think it's fine to say, yes, H3 uses Quick V1. It's more just kind of like the text around that paragraph of how do we phrase the flexibility of how we would update this later to allow H3 to also work over Quick 2. And it's really probably just kind of the nuances. I don't think we should have like a full mapping document. Like let us do that in TAPS and that'll be fun to work on, but like that's not for this document. We shouldn't hold that up.
Okay, we're running out of time. Where are the blue sheets? Anyone? Are they still in the room? Does anybody need them? Put your hand up now. Okay, thanks. So folks on the line, please keep it very brief, and we're going to try and do a hum before we finish. Let's go.
Kyle, Chris, just a very quick clarification. When we say H1 equal or H3 equals Q1, we're not saying that Q1 is restricted to H3.
No.
Of course.
No. Other ALPN tokens for other protocols might also use Quick 1.
Yeah. I think the minimal thing here is to say H3 implies Q1, and then we can punt all the rest of that till later. It's worth, and then I think there are a number of options available to us when we finally do Q2. One that has not, I mean, like, I know there was like some hate for like actually writing this down, but like one thing we've done in TLS is like we have like a column of like in the registries that says, can you use this for DTLS? And some things you can and some things you can't. And like, I think for like the number of application protocols or protocols are going to run over, be defined by IETF and run over Quick in the next like 5 years, like just listing which ones were Quick 2 is not going to be like an enormous problem.
This is Daniel Kahn-Gilmore. Just say H3 implies Quick V1. The idea that this whole working group is going to successfully describe what the specific properties are of Q1 that HTTP3 relies on in any reasonable period of time is bananas. It's not going to happen. Just say H3 equals Q1 and we will figure it out later.
Nick Harper, clarification question. If we say H3 means Q1 right now, does that allow us when there's Quick 2 to also use H3 with that? Okay, that's what I want to do.
We would ship another document at that time expanding the definition of H3. And then we would also have to figure out what happens if there's a mismatch on whether two sides support that document.
Janai,
Do you have a clarification question?
A clarification point. I had misunderstood something. Roberto helped me understand it. I'm in agreement with H3 equals Q1.
Okay. So I'm going to do two hums. One is if you believe we should close this issue by just saying that H3 is Quick version 1. There might be a little bit of editorial wiggle room around that, but no detail. The other would be we're going to take some time and do some work to try and describe the properties we want from Quick that mean H3. Does that make sense? Okay. So if you believe that we should just stop and say H3 is Q1, please hum now. And if you believe we need to spend more time on this and try and do this in a properties-based approach, please hum now. That's pretty clear. Okay, thank you, Mike. We'll return tomorrow and we'll talk about HTTP and recovery issues, talk about extensions, and talk about the future. Thank you.
Yeah.